next speaker is Dr. Katie Mason. She is assistant professor at the University of Tennessee, Department of Animal Science, beef extension specialist, and she's going to be speaking about matching cattle to your production environment, selecting small frame cattle for pasture-based beef systems. Katie, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Go ahead and take my mask off. I'm used to wearing this all day when I teach, so I'm going to take a little break from it if that's all right with y'all. Happy to be here with you. So I just wanted to take a minute to introduce myself first. You probably haven't seen me yet. Let me tell you, it's been a weird time to start a job in extension. I just started at University of Tennessee in August of last year. So you can imagine I haven't gotten a lot of face time with producers yet because we've kind of been locked away on campus. So I did just graduate last August with my PhD from Auburn University. I got my PhD as well as my master's there. So I've spent the past 5 years in Alabama, but I'm not from there. I'm from Georgia. So at least you can't hold that against me, right? So in my position at University of Tennessee, I have an 85% extension and 15% teaching appointment. I'm in the animal science department, so I'm a beef cattle nutrition specialist, but I kind of toe that line between animal science and forage agronomy. And so my training and background is in grazing systems and forage-based systems. That's what my research was in for my PhD. And so I kind of have a hard time figuring out where I fit. When I walk through the halls in the animal science department, it's a lot of, genetics and reproduction and very heavy animal science research. If I walk through the hallways in the crop science department, it's corn and soybeans and tobacco and those things. And so when I have the opportunity to talk to people who want to talk about beef cattle and forages, these people, y'all are my people. So I'm happy to be here. I think this is only the second in-person meeting that I've gotten to do since I've been here. So real happy to be here with y'all today. So my research program will be very applied. I'll focus on specifically questions that I get from county agents and from producers. My job is to provide answers to producers and hopefully answers that directly apply to their farm. And so there's a place obviously for research that is kind of abstract or a little bit more big concept, but for me, I want my research to directly apply to your farm. And so any questions that you have, obviously ask your county agent, call me, and we'll hopefully be able to get solutions for you and even develop some demonstrations out of that. The topics of interest, that I'll focus on are extending the grazing season. So as an animal scientist, I know that sometimes producers will have to feed their cattle conserved forages and maybe even some supplemental feed, but I really want to focus on being able to graze as many days of the year as possible. Reduced labor winter feeding systems, so ways that we can deliver supplemental feed and hay and reduce the labor associated with that. And then finally, what we're all thinking about today is this regenerative agriculture movement. So that interaction between plant, soil, and animal performance. Now I have that in quotations up here. Obviously that doesn't necessarily have to be in quotations, but from a research aspect, we're working on defining what that means for interdisciplinary work. And so I'm really excited about that opportunity in my program. So that's just about me. I just wanted to let you know who I am since you probably haven't seen me yet, but I look forward to getting out and meeting more producers as time goes on. So today we're going to talk about selecting cattle for your system. And the end of the day, cattle have a superpower, right? Cattle are my hero because they can take grass, things that we can't eat, and because they are ruminant animals, they have microbes in their rumen that digest those fibrous materials and turn it into a product that we can eat. So beef is highly nutritious, a lot of protein, and so at the end of the day, they're a solar-powered organism that can create this nutritious opportunity for us. And so our goal as beef cattle producers or livestock producers and forage managers is to make the most efficient use of our system and to get that end product most efficiently. So utilizing what we have well and meeting their requirements as we go. Now, it's important to select animals that are right for your system. This is going to vary depending on what your production goals are, what your labor situation looks like, what the outcome you're expecting is. And so there's not a one-size-fits-all solution here. And honestly, that's a good thing, right? Because a lot of us would be out of a job if there was just everybody go do it the same way. But there are some goals that we all want to meet. And so in terms of grazing systems or beef cattle is what I specifically focus on, but sheep, goats, whatever we're grazing, we want to think about animals that have adequate milking ability, early maturity, and tenderness. And so I'm thinking about that end product that we're trying to get. In this case, I'm thinking about beef. And so I want a mama cow that can have a calf efficiently on a pasture-based system, raise that calf up well, produce plenty of milk for it so that it weans at a good weight, and then when that calf gets bigger and we go to harvest it, it produces a palatable and nutritious and tender product for the consumer. So we want to think about what that end product is. And for us, pounds of beef or pounds of weaned calf as cattle managers is what we tend to focus on, but we have to think a little bit further than that. What does the consumer want from their meat product? And so a lot of folks are focused on grass or forage finishing. They may be doing grain on grass, they may be doing a combination. Freezer beef has become really common in the past year here in Tennessee just because of COVID-19, the local food movement. And so there are a lot of different ways that we can think about how we can achieve this goal. In terms of grazing systems, small to moderate body type English breed animals are going to work well. So I have an emphasis here on body type, not necessarily breed. There are different breeds that can work in a grazing system, but we want to select traits from those breeds to make sure that they work well for the system that we have. So some of those production traits that we want to focus on are adaptability, so their ability to perform well in the environment that we put them in. One thing that we think about here in Tennessee is tall fescue. And so either managing the way that we graze that tall fescue or the animals that we put on it, because that is what is most common here, or even utilizing other forage species in conjunction with or as a way to replace tall fescue. Fertility, we want to focus on cattle that can breed back efficiently on a grazing system, that can maintain their body condition so that they do breed back well and maintain that yearly calving interval. And longevity, so cattle or other livestock that will stay in our herd for several years so that that initial investment in either purchasing or developing that animal can be paid off over time by having several calves and not having to get rid of that brood cow or those other mature female livestock animals. So some of the production traits that we look at, average milking ability. So in terms of beef cattle, and I'm sorry, that's my reference point, but other grazing livestock as well, we want them to be able to milk enough to wean a calf or whatever their young animal is off of them, but we don't want a lot of their energy going to lactation. They're not a dairy animal. In terms of dairy, we may want a higher producer dairy animal, right? So in terms of producing beef, we want a low input animal that can still produce enough milk for its calf. Feet and leg soundness, can they stand properly? Are they going to be able to walk around and graze properly and have access to that forage that we want them to eat? Udder quality, so that can their young nurse well off of them? Good carcass characteristics, yield and tenderness, so thinking again about that end product. What are we actually producing? Pounds of beef, right? Or pounds of whatever animal that we're grazing. Early maturation. So we'll talk about growth in a second, frame score, and how that affects the way that they finish, the way that they lay on fat. And then low maintenance. This is the big one right here. Cattle nutrient requirements are partitioned into maintenance and then whatever their production is, growth, pregnancy, lactation, whatever they're going through at that time. And so we want animals that are efficient and low maintenance. They're not spending a lot of their nutrients just maintaining their body, and more of that is going into their production. So we're looking for those production traits in breeds like the ones listed here. And there are some commercial breeds, there are some heritage breeds, and there are even some breeds that I don't have up there that maybe several of you have. Again, I focused on beef cattle here because that's my specialty, but there are other, breeds of other livestock that may be more specific to grazing situations as well. So Angus, Red Angus, Hereford, and Shorthorn, those are going to be the commercial breeds that people tend to graze here that can work well because they're small framed. And then there are these heritage breeds, Devon, Dexter, Lowline, Galloway. There are several different types. And so my main point is I wouldn't recommend a specific breed to you. I want you to select traits out of the breeds that work well for your system. Hybrid vigor or crossbreeding can be really beneficial. It can create increased performance of your cattle if you have multiple breeds that you've put together. Potentially some small amount of Brahman influence. I've heard somebody mention South Pole cattle. They have a little bit of Brahman influence, but they're not a lot. And so having some of those composite breeds can also work well in these very heavy grazing situations. So let's talk about frame score and what that means in terms of cattle growth. So we have different frame scores here. These are, when we think about feeder cattle, when they've been sent to harvest, they're going to be ranked based on their frame. And so their frames can be large, medium, and small, and we'll associate some numbers with those in just a second. But this relates to their growth, so their rate of growth, and the weight at which they finish. And so when we're talking about finish, we're talking about a standard back fat thickness. So that finished product, we're looking for a certain amount of marbling in the carcass, a certain amount of fat across the back. And these cattle will finish at different weights based on their frame. And so we're looking at their skeletal size, the height and the body length, so looking at it both directions, based on their age. So I mentioned that small to moderate frame cattle work really well in these grazing systems. Small to moderate frame cattle will finish earlier, meaning they'll reach that back fat thickness, that finish point, earlier in their life, between 800 to 1,000 pounds, so at a lighter weight than what some of our large frame cattle will, and at an earlier age. So that means that their carcass is going to be younger, they're going to be more tender, more palatable to the consumer, but they're still going to have the amount of fat that that finished product needs. So because they mature earlier, because they reach that point to where they've stopped putting on lean muscle and they've started putting on fat tissue both in the muscle, that intramuscular fat or marbling, and that muscle on the outside, then again, they're going to reach that quicker. And so we're not feeding them as long. We're not having to feed their maintenance requirements as much because they're going to be putting on more of that fat rather than just maintaining their body. So this figure just shows weight at the quality grade choice. So we think of quality grades like select, choice, and prime, right? And typically the American consumer is looking for a choice product. In some niche markets, they may look for prime. But this would just be kind of our standard, what we're really shooting for in the beef industry. And so for small to moderate frame cattle, they'll reach that choice grade, 725 to 825 for those really small animals. And then we start getting up into these larger frame scores. You can see that this 7 frame score, 1,325 pounds and up. So that animal has to get really large to be able to finish because of its growth rate. And so in terms of providing the nutrition from a grazing system, we want the smaller framed animals because we have more of a low input. We're not having to drive as many nutrients towards that growth into those larger frame cattle. Now in terms of our brood cows, maintenance requirements, and don't get caught up in the numbers here. I teach beef management to senior level undergrads, and whenever I put up a graph, they're just like collective groan, they hate it. So I don't want you to focus too much on the numbers, but what I want you to look at, we have their net energy for maintenance requirements, so the amount of megacalories per day that it takes for that animal just to stay alive, just to maintain its bodily function. We have months since calving because we know that our mature animals, brood cows, will go through a stage of production change. Obviously at calving they're going to have a lactation, and then they're going to eventually wean that animal off. They're going to have a dry period, and then they're going to be pregnant at the end of that interval and eventually give birth again. And so we see that no matter what the size of the animal is, obviously there is going to be a fluctuation in their nutrient needs based on their stage of production. But I have it broken down into mature cow size. So each of these bars, we have a red bar for a 1,000-pound cow, a green bar for a 1,200-pound cow, and a purple or blue bar for a 1,400-pound cow. And you can see that when we compare these bars to one another, no matter what the stage of production is, the larger animals always have a greater maintenance requirement. So more of the nutrients are going just to maintain that animal's bodily processes than are going to her pregnancy, her lactation, or the growth of her fetus. And so in terms of input cost, we really want to keep that maintenance cost down here on the lower side. And so again, we're looking for small frame cattle, not only in terms of those growing cattle that we're going to harvest for meat, but our brood cows as well. So if we have less maintenance requirements, then we have more performance, right? If less of the energy is going towards maintaining that body, then more of it can go towards body condition, so making sure that she's got plenty of extra energy reserves so that she breeds back in a timely manner, gestation, the growth of her fetus, and milk production. So there's a goal that we talk about in terms of weaning weight for beef cattle. That is, we want that mature cow to wean 50% of her body weight. And it's really tough for those large cows to do that, right? Because they're only going to get so big until they have to come off the mom and go on to pasture. And so when we're thinking about our mature cows, if we want them to wean 50% of their body weight, then they're going to need to be, relative in size to their calves, fairly small to be able to accomplish that. And so one point that I like to make right here is knowing the weight of your cattle. A lot of times producers don't have a scale, or they don't weigh their mature cows very often because they're just there. They're kind of, we have them in the herd and we feed them and they have a calf and whatever, and we're worried about their calves because we might be selling those off, but we don't weigh our mature cows. And so I would encourage you, if you have the ability to do that, to check the weights on your cows and know what they are. Because a lot of times we're off as far as eyeballing it. And so I saw the other day that a gentleman sold off some mature cows that his family had. He had just taken over the farm, and he said, these cows are just too big. They cost too much to feed, they're too big. And he had them weighed at the sale barn, and they weighed 1,800 pounds. And he would have never guessed that, because it's just like they just had these tanks out there that they were feeding all the time. And so our cows have gotten bigger, and I think now we're starting to see that we need to get them back smaller. And so getting rid of some of those big cows, bringing in new genetics to start shifting back to a little bit more moderate to even small frame size. Now in terms of stocking rate, and I stole this example from a video that Greg Judy put together because I think that it makes a really good point, he talks about small frame cattle and profitability. So again, at the end of the day, we're making either weaned calf weight, pounds weaned or pounds of beef. And we think about stocking rate, or how many of those animals we can support on a given area. If we have large frame cattle, and these are two 1,500-pound cows, then we can only put so many of them, on a given area of land. We have 3,000 pounds between the two of them. So if we had small frame cattle, we can put 3 1,000-pound cows, right? So we've put more animals on the same amount of space because we have less body weight, and we've produced an extra calf off of that same acreage to sell. So we're putting the same amount of body weight per acre, but we're getting an additional calf because less of that forage is going to maintenance requirements for these big old cows over here. So I think this is a really neat illustration to talk about how we can still be profitable with these smaller animals. So kind of the theme of the day has been tall grass and short legs, right? We all want to have really good forage. We want plenty of that, a diverse mix of that, good soil health, and then for cattle, or whatever our livestock are, we want short ones, and we want to see them kind of not buried in the grass, but we want them to have plenty. I don't want to see their feet when I go by. I don't want to see them standing on what looks like a golf course, right? And so we want to make sure that there's abundant forage. If they're lying down and chewing their cud, that's a good sign. That means that they've gotten enough in them to now they can go sit down and actually ruminate on that feed. If they're standing up and grazing all the time, then they're looking for forage. They're out there looking to get full. But if they're able to have plenty available to them and then go ruminate, that's telling us, okay, we've provided enough forage for those animals. There are several different rules of thumb. I've heard a few about, inches or forage availability, whatever. One that we like to say is 50% of forage should be grazed and then 50% left. Take half, leave half. You maybe have heard it that way. But we just want to leave some residual leaf area so that paddock can regrow, the roots can regenerate, and then we can come back at a later time and graze that area again, potentially. So with that, I can take any questions right now. I'll be around for just a little bit at the end. I also have my card if you want my information. I will admit that this semester, my first semester of teaching, I've been a little bit overwhelmed, and so probably haven't gotten back with people as quickly as I should. But as that wraps up here at the end of April, I'm hoping to be able to get out and come see some farms, meet some producers, and really get my extension program going. So, yeah.
It seems to me if you're a small producer, you obviously can't compete with the big feedlots and all that and supplying them. But getting into heritage cattle and registered cattle seems to me to be you can sell the offspring for a higher price. It costs a little more money to get into it, and there's a little more paper trail involved, but it seems like that's where more profit is.
Yeah, so the comment was for smaller producers looking to make a profit maybe on some locally raised beef, there seems to be a premium with some of those heritage breeds, and maybe there's a little bit more cost associated with getting that started, but that does create a marketing opportunity. So either by breed, by finishing, if you want to finish on forage, a lot of people are really looking at forage finished beef or even just local beef. And so, yeah, there's some opportunity for niche marketing right there. Yeah. Any other questions? Thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate that very much. Another thing about the large frame animals that, we go through a winter like we did this year and a lot more destruction on your pasture fields versus a small frame. So that's something else to consider.